Good morning, third year. In today's lesson, we're going to be looking in more detail at approaches to develop muscular endurance. How can we effectively improve our performance through developing our muscular endurance? And we're also going to be looking at the 4 principles of training. Now, first of all, I want to say a huge well done to all of you who've started your circuit training and who've been filling in your training diaries, adapting your circuits to get the most effective training that you possibly can for your muscular endurance. Now, resistance training that you've been doing, press-ups, planks, sit-ups, they're all forms of resistance training. I think is a really important form of exercise that we all include in our lives. I just wanted to start with a quick slide that shows just some of the benefits that resistance training gives you. So, a lowered risk of diabetes, a lowered risk of heart disease, a lowered risk of developing some cancers, lowered cholesterol levels, an increased metabolic rate, which means after you've performed resistance training, you burn calories for several days afterwards at an increased rate than what you normally would. It turns body fat into lean muscle. It makes your bones stronger. It reduces the risk of osteoporosis and other disabilities in old age, and essentially improves your movement as you grow older. So, in doing so, improves the quality of your life when you're older. It increases your mental well-being, reduces anxiety, and to gain these benefits, scientists state that you should perform resistance training twice a week for 15 to 20 minutes, and your exercise should work all the major muscle groups in this time. So essentially what you've been doing twice a week for 15 to 20 minutes will give you all of these benefits and more. So I think 15 to 20 minutes in a whole week, or 40 minutes in a whole week, isn't that much, and it gets you so much as a result. It's a really good thing to consider making part of your routine every week. But apart from those benefits, the circuit training we're doing is obviously developing your muscular endurance. And in doing so, it should enhance and increase the performance in your chosen activity. Almost all activities require muscular endurance, and in improving it, you're almost guaranteed to become more able to work at a high level for the full duration of your performance. If our training is to be really effective though, as effective as it can be, we've got to understand the 4 principles of effective training and include them in our training regime. The 4 principles are specificity, progressive overload, reversibility, and tedium. And if you put them together, they make the word sport, which makes it nice and easy to remember. So the first of the sport principles is specificity. For your training to be effective, it must develop the factor that you've identified as an area for development. It should also involve movements which occur during your chosen activity. So if you're a basketball player and you want to improve the muscular endurance of your legs, you might want to include jumps in your exercises because that's something you're going to do during your actual chosen activity. When training muscular endurance, it's important that you're able to perform more than 8 repetitions of an exercise. Any less than this and it will develop strength rather than endurance. So that's one really important principle if you're looking at muscular endurance, is you should have lots of repetitions at a low weight. If you want to train strength, it would be few repetitions and a heavy weight. So the second principle of effective training is progressive overload. This is something we must include in our training if we want to continue to see gains in our improvement in performance. As you train, your body will adapt to the training, and when it is adapted to it, it will no longer improve but instead maintain that level. For example, if you started out your circuit training doing 10 press-ups for your circuit, and that really was challenging by the 3rd set, you would see your performance rapidly improving. Your arm's endurance would improve because it's been worked at its limit, so your fitness level is going to rise over time. But as your endurance improves, that 10 press-ups is no longer going to be challenging. It's no longer going to be overloading your muscles to do just those 10. So rather than increasing, you're going to get what's called a plateau. So you will just maintain that level of fitness. So at that point, when it becomes slightly easier to do that set of exercises, you must introduce progressive overload. And we do that by changing one or more of the FIT principles. So we make our training harder, and in doing that, again, we overload our muscles and our body, and we start to see fitness gains again, which will go up, and then our body will maintain, and then we'll have to again progressively overload so that we continue to see improvement over time. And that is progressive overload. So how do we progressively overload our muscles? Well, we can make our training progressively more difficult by adjusting any of the 5 FIT principles for adapting your training. So first, we can change the frequency. This is the number of times you train in a week. At the moment, we're doing 2 training sessions a week, and we could increase that to 3, and that would increase the difficulty and the demand on your muscles. We can change the interval. This is the length of rests between exercise and a session. At the moment, you get a 1-minute rest in between your sets. We could adjust that to be 50 seconds, and again, this would increase the demand on your muscles as they wouldn't have as much time to recover. And if we're looking at muscle recovery, that might be something that you focus on. Next is intensity. This is how hard you work during a session. Now, in resistance training, this would normally mean adjusting the weights that you're lifting, or doing a different exercise or a modified exercise. Such as in press-ups, you can raise your feet on a step or a settee to make it harder and increasing the weight. What we need to be careful of when we're working on endurance is that we don't increase the weight so much that we can't do many repetitions, as this will start to work strength rather than endurance. Next is time. You can adjust how long you exercise for. Obviously, the longer the time, the greater the demand on your muscles. Finally, type. We can change the type of training you use. You can use a different type of exercise, a more demanding one, or you could change the type of training altogether, say from circuit training to continuous training on a rowing machine, for example, where you do the same action over and over again continuously for a set length of time. These are the 5 things that you can change to adapt your training, and you can change them to make the training harder, and in doing so overload your muscles. And you should do this progressively as your training goes on to make it harder and harder as you go on, to ensure that you continue to develop and increase your performance. So if we want to improve our muscular endurance, and we're looking at the FIT principles, in a circuit training, it's very easy to adjust any of the FIT principles. We can change the frequency, the intensity, the interval, the time, and the type of exercise we're doing. But muscular endurance is the ability of your muscles to work hard for a long time, and therefore it makes sense that if we want to overload our bodies and increase our muscular endurance, then the best way to ensure continuous improvement is to increase the time we exercise for. So for each exercise in your circuit this week, what I'd like you to do is increase your exercise time by 5 to 10 seconds if you feel that you were able to complete the exercises in last week's circuit. By doing that, you should ensure that your muscles are being overloaded, because they will have adapted to the exercise you did last week, and we want to continuously adapt your body and increase your endurance. So for each exercise, increase your exercise time by 5 to 10 seconds for this week's circuit. The next of the sport principles is reversibility. So reversibility is the idea that if you stop training for any reason, then your performance level will reverse. It will stop getting better, and instead it will go down to that base level that you started at again. And why is this important? Well, we all have breaks in our training for different reasons. It might be injury, it might be illness, it might just be I didn't have time that week. These things happen. But it does mean that if you've taken a break in your training, you'll need to adjust down the FIT principles when you start back. because if you try and work at the level you were previous to the break, then you may injure yourself as your muscles and your body will have reversed back to their prior state and will not be able to cope with the demands that they were at before you had your break. So that's reversibility. Now, the final sport principle is tedium, and I think it's one of the most important principles to take into account when planning a training program. Tedium basically means boredom, and it's important we avoid boredom at all costs when we're training. If you become bored with your training, then it's going to stop being effective, because it's very hard to gain performance if you're not motivated and enjoying the training you're doing. For training to be effective, you need to be overloading your muscles, and if you're overloading your muscles, it's sore, and if you're bored and sore, then you're never going to put in the effort that you need to continue gaining performance. Ways that we can combat tedium is that we can use new exercises, listen to music, work out with a friend, although that's difficult at the moment, but maybe work out with somebody else in your house. You can also set goals for each training period, because these can help motivate you and give you something to focus on, perhaps a set number of reps that you want to achieve in the time. So a really important thing for us in our own personal performance, and also if we go on to become PTs or coaches, it's looking for ways to train that avoid tedium and make it exciting and interesting and engaging, and in doing so really maximise the performance gains we can get from the training. So why did I choose circuit training as an effective means to develop muscular endurance for you all? Well, first off, it's very practical. It requires very little equipment and it can be completed almost anywhere. It could be in your front room or your bedroom. There's always a space where you can perform these exercises. It's specific. The exercise you've chosen should specifically develop muscular endurance, and circuit training is recognised as an excellent method of developing muscular endurance by PTs and coaches. Progressive overload. It's very easy to add progressive overload to the circuit training using the FIT principles. You can adjust the frequency, the intensity, the interval, the time and the type. If we're thinking about reversibility, it's very easy to adjust your circuit back down if you've had a break in training. If you're injured for some reason, it's quite easy to switch to exercises that rest the injured part, and then you can again reverse the FIT principles when that part of your body is able to start again. And finally, tedium. Well, it's quite easy that you can switch in new exercises if you're becoming bored. So if you've been doing press-ups, you can maybe do a press-up modifier like clap press-ups. Challenge yourself, do something new, and in doing that, relieve the tedium. So in today's lesson, we've looked at the benefits of resistance training, and we've also looked at the principles of training, the sport principles that underpin effective training. If you're to have effective training, it's really important that you consider the sport principles and plan your development plan around those. We've also learned how to adapt our training using the FIT principles. These are the things that you can adjust in your training program to make your training harder or easier to ensure that it's most effective for you. We've also looked at the reasons why you might choose a certain approach to develop performance, by either how well they can incorporate the sport principles or how practical they are. Now that you've watched this slideshow through, please fill in the task sheet, which has questions, and all the answers to the questions should be contained in these slides. I've also given little reminders in certain questions as to which slide you can look back on if you're needing a little bit of help answering those questions. And as always, if you're unsure about anything, please don't hesitate to give myself or Mr. Warnes an email or a shout any way you like, and we'll always be happy to help you out. Thank you very much.